Last week, we looked at the manifestations of the sanctuary. God always had a sanctuary among men in order to have community with them. If in history of man, God always has sought community with them, then I can be sure that God also seeks community with me every day in my life.
Hello, my name is Martin Proebstle, and I welcome you to week number 3 of our study of the biblical theme of the sanctuary. Now, week number 3 is all about that original activity of God which helps to bridge the gulf which has sin created between humans and God Himself, and that is the activity of the sacrifice. If I would have to choose one biblical text which illustrates what sacrifice is all about, I would probably take Leviticus 17:11. Let me read that from the Today's New International Version. God says here, "For the life of a creature is in the blood, and I have given it to you to make atonement for yourselves on the altar. It is the blood that makes atonement for one's life." I learned 3 essential things here about sacrifice. First, life is blood. So if you offer an animal on the altar, it means you offer a life on the altar. Blood is spilled. Number 2, this act of sacrifice has an expiatory function. It makes atonement for the people who bring that sacrifice. And number 3, and this is most astonishing, it is God Himself who gives that sacrifice. Now, this is different to all other religions where human people go to offer their sacrifices to alleviate an angry God. Here it is God who, by His grace and love, offers a way so that human beings can approach Him anymore. Again. But this is something which has a long history. It goes back right to the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve, when they sinned, experienced a number of consequences of this first sin. But the first one mentioned in the Bible is that their attitude toward their external appearances changed. They perceive that they are naked, and they fear that. Because Adam hid himself in front of God because he says, "I am naked." And then it's interesting to see that God's first creative activity, right after humans have sinned, is that He makes garments of skin to clothe Adam and Eve. So to cover their nakedness so that they may be, that they might easily approach Him again. But God already has told them that He is willing to give His own sacrifice. In Genesis 3:15, He makes that promise that when the offspring comes, who will crush the head of the serpent, and the serpent is a symbol for Satan here, that when this happens, it will also crush the heel of that offspring. We call that offspring the Messiah. So God's victory over Satan involves some kind of sacrifice. This is the way how God will save us. Now, from the Garden of Eden, they took that idea of sacrificing God along outside Eden through their history. We see Cain and Abel. We see also Noah sacrificing Abraham, Job. And the one story which astonishes me most is probably Genesis 22, when Abraham is called to offer his own son. His promise, actually God's promise, and he has to put him on the altar to show that God is more important than all the things God promises. But Abraham learns two more things. He learns first that God sees. He says, God will provide a sacrifice, the lamb. In the end, he gives a name to that place where he experienced that trial. It's the place where God sees. Again, we have the idea that it is God who gives the sacrifice. The second thing Abraham learns is that this lamb, this ram, actually is offered instead of his son. It's a substitutional sacrifice. Now, all these sacrifices look forward to Jesus Christ, who is for us the substitution, the sacrifice. In Israel, it's interesting to see that sacrifices can be brought for many reasons. You can bring a sacrifice, of course, that your sin might be forgiven, as a plea of forgiveness. But also you can bring it if you're joyful, if you want to express your jubilation, if you want to have a feast, even if you want to maybe give a restitution for harm done, if you want to, well, every life aspect is involved with a sacrifice, it seems. And it was always God who wanted more than just the animal. He wanted the heart of the human beings. He wanted them to live as people freed from fear. And this is seen in the New Testament again. Even though Jesus has brought the ultimate sacrifice, we are still called to bring sacrifices. Well, not animals, of course, but ourselves. In Romans 12, verse 1, the Apostle Paul calls us to bring our bodies as a logical, true worship to God. Because of all the things Christ has done, and Paul lists them in Romans 3, 4, 5, up to 8. Because of all these good actions of God, we are enticed to bring ourselves now, to give him a life of, well, some would say perfect obedience. Let me call it a life of unconditional love, actions toward him. We bring that because Jesus is our ultimate sacrifice. That's the thing what God wants, still today. He doesn't want just a religious heart, he wants to have our heart with all our lives. And here comes the call of God. Are we willing to give ourselves because he has given himself?